You're listening to the greatest multifamily investment advice show. My name is Adam Ross, and now I'm talking everything multifamily for an in-depth conversation, and I will be diving deep into raising capital, deals, and underwriting process. Welcome back to the greatest multifamily advice show. Today we have James Knull, real estate investor and realtor out of Edmonton region of Alberta, focused on scaling his portfolio in Edmonton to more than 300 door, high performance realtor, closing and selling hundreds and hundreds of deals. How are you, James?
I'm fantastic, Adam. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for being with us today, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love having these great conversations about multifamily investing, the Edmonton market, real estate in general. I'm excited to get started.
Thanks a lot. So, James, your career as a realtor, I think on Edmonton market was an edge to scale your business. But before we start, can we go back to the beginning as a realtor and investor? What was the motivation to focus on multifamily?
Well, the reason I transitioned into multifamily, I actually started investing in single family properties when I was quite young, in my early 20s. And I knew that the logical progression in my mind was to grow into a larger, more complex, more expensive asset class, which was multifamily. So I always knew multifamily was on the horizon. I had goals, hopes, and dreams of acquiring multifamily assets. I didn't really know how long it would take me to get there, but I knew I would get there eventually. And by the eighth year of being in investing, so 8 years after I bought my first property is when I bought my first 12-unit apartment building and made the jump into multifamily. And then after that, I've acquired now 14 multifamily buildings in my portfolio, and always keeping my eyes open for the next one.
So, what is your target market? It is basically based on the cap rate, cash on cash, because I think the issue with Edmonton so far is the appreciation is not too much on the last 15 years. So, how you target your market?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The appreciation at Edmonton has been quite slow, quite small. There's no doubt about that. But we choose our markets based on location within Edmonton.
Yeah.
Even though Edmonton as a conglomerate hasn't really been appreciating, the city of Edmonton is investing big dollars into large scale infrastructure to improve certain areas of the city.
Mm.
And so we're looking at where those infrastructure dollars are being spent and then acquiring properties that are within walking distance of those infrastructure improvements. Because ultimately, even if the city doesn't improve at a certain pace, we know that property near the infrastructure does historically still grow, even in when the Edmonton market in total is a little bit slower. So the main piece of infrastructure we look for, LRT, which stands for light rail transit, it's our train,
Yeah.
metro line. So it just helps people get around. It makes those areas of the city more accessible and it drives property value in those areas. So the city of Edmonton has a 20-year plan for where they want to be building this infrastructure. And we just very purposefully and conscientiously buy properties within walking distance of metro lines. And that's my strategy. It's the location I find is more important than the numbers because I find that the numbers take care of themselves when the location is desirable.
Mm. So you're focusing in which class, basically, class B or class C on
I would
multifamily?
say a lot of it's class B,
Yeah.
or if we do get a class C building in a
In a
B
B area.
area,
Yeah.
then we invest into doing the renovations to improve the building to a B building. I wouldn't say we own any A assets. It's all very solid B assets.
Okay. Regarding the actual numbers itself, I see a lot of deals on Menton, but I see that the cap rate is going down and down because of the actual inflation and so far. So
Mhm.
what is the making sense number right now? What is the actual number now for the cap rate when you're looking for deals? I found like some deals on Edmonton is 3.5 and 4%, which it doesn't make sense because when
That's
you're
quite low,
going
yeah.
to Edmonton, your goal always is going to be the cash flow.
I would agree with that sentiment. Yeah. I mean, in Edmonton, the core value proposition is finding properties that do post good quality cash flow, because
Yeah.
you're absolutely right when you say that, Edmonton doesn't typically appreciate as fast as the other markets. So it has to have a benefit to make up for that. And that benefit is cash flow.
Yeah.
When we're looking at properties, we want cap rates in the fives, low to mid fives. If
Mm.
something is in the sixes, that's a pretty good indicator that it's now a C asset
Yeah.
that's either a poor condition of a building, poor location, or a combination of the two,
Hmm.
which is a little past our comfort zone. So, for us, like low to mid fives is typically what we're seeing for the asset class we're going after, which are, B assets or C assets in B locations.
Okay, so what is the challenge so far with the Edmonton market right now? I'm asking you this because other market is already really challenging, and I think many investors moving to the west side, Saskatchewan, Alberta, of course
Mhm.
not Vancouver.
Yeah.
They trying to focus on the cash flow. So what was I think the challenge for you on the last 3 years, or you don't have any challenges on finding deals?
Yeah, I mean, well, finding deals is definitely a challenge. Good deals are always hard to come by in any market.
Hmm.
So, the deal readiness is always an important factor. If you're unable and don't have the capacity to act quickly on a
Hmm.
good deal, somebody else will. So that challenge never goes away. In Edmonton, the challenge is because the market is, slower, there's not a lot of elasticity in rents, especially in the asset class that we're in. If you try to raise the rent by even $25, that can be a reason for somebody to move to a less expensive building. So,
Hmm.
it's very, very tight on the numbers. And even though the cash flow is solid, the lack of appreciation is constantly a challenge because, in other markets, your building is going to go up by several $100,000 in a year. And
100%.
so you have equity there to play with if you need to do expensive renovations, improvements, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in Edmonton, the values stay relatively static. So even though you are accumulating a bit of cash flow, you have to be very mindful of the property management because there isn't a constant addition of equity value to then refinance and pull from to constantly reinvest into the building. So a very prudent strategy is it's a little more cash intensive if you're buying buildings that aren't just brand new, because typically the equity isn't appreciating fast enough to have funds available to do expensive improvements. And with older buildings, that typically happens. So while the appreciation being low creates an environment where the affordability is really high or really low, sorry, the affordability index is high, therefore the cash flow is high. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
High cash flow can only add up to so much. In a 20-unit building, if you're cash flowing, $100 per door per month, that's $2,000 a month. That's maybe $20,000 to $25,000 a year. One boiler replacement or 2 or 3 suites that need to be completely renovated will take that total profit margin up. Whereas, if your property goes up by a couple $100,000 in a year, you can refinance and use that $100,000 to do whatever you like.
100%.
So, every market has its pros and cons. Edmonton, if you buy a building that is in good repair, stable, you've got a decent cash reserve, you cash flow, which is really nice. Other markets, it's very hard to get cash flow, but you're seeing equity appreciation in the value of the building.
So this is okay. Then I think force appreciation is not an easy. Whatever you're saying is like there's no an actual strategy to do BRRRR or force appreciation to raise the rent and then take advantage of raising the actual value of the building, because you're saying that is not gonna work.
Well, no, what I'm saying is BRRRR is actually one of the most popular strategies in Edmonton
Yeah.
because, in Vancouver, for example, you can buy an old building in bad shape,
Yeah.
wait a year, and you have appreciation. In Edmonton, you buy that same old building and you wait a year, it's probably going to be worth roughly the same amount, maybe a little bit more.
Hmm.
So in Edmonton, value added renovations and BRRRR is one of the most popular things that people do here, specifically because if the market isn't going to create appreciation for you, you create appreciation for yourself by doing those
100%.
renovations.
Yeah.
So the value add proposition is very, very strong in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And that gets added to by the fact that there's no PST in Edmonton. There's only GST.
Yeah. Only 5%, I think.
Only 5%. Yeah. So I
Okay.
mean, every hour of contractor time, every building material, everything is, 6 to 10% less expensive than it would be in other markets in the country because it's only 5% GST. So that's a really nice perk, and it makes,
So
doing these.
you're saving the HST.
You're saving the HST. You're not paying any
Great.
HST.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on $100,000 renovation, that adds up.
Yeah.
That's
100%.
a lot of that's a lot of money that can go to your bottom line.
100%.
So, so Edmonton's a great environment for BRRRR in addition to that, the landlord tenant laws in Edmonton are much more landlord friendly. So for example, if you bought, let's say you buy an old building, 20 units, and most of the units in that building are on fixed term leases that are set to expire or month-to-month leases.
Yeah.
In Edmonton, you only need to give 90 days notice to terminate a month-to-month tenancy. So if you buy an old building and you want to do a proper renovation, change the dynamic of the building, renovate every suite, up the tenant profile, up the rents to do that value add that we've been talking about, you're not handcuffed by old leases. You can just, any tenant that's on month to month, you give them 90 days notice. Okay, we want the suite vacated. And then with any fixed term lease, at the end of the term, the lease automatically ends. There's no legal obligation to renew month to month at the end of a fixed term lease. So you get to be much more quick and fluid and agile if you want to reposition a building in Edmonton. So, you know, that it's actually much, much more popular to do that type of project because number one, it's cheaper to do it from a tax perspective. Number two, it's easier to do it from a landlord perspective. And number three, it's really the smartest thing to do because you can't count on the market to improve in value. So you've got to roll up your sleeves and create your own appreciation.
Yeah, because because the market itself is investor friendly. There's no rent control. You can do an actual eviction within, as you said, 90 days to do an actual renovation or add value. So you're forcing that as a building. You're able to go back and do the refinance and eventually increase the NOI and so on.
Yeah.
Going back to your portfolio, so what is your focus right now? Old buildings, new building, new construction, redevelopment. What is your niche right now?
The last few, so I built my portfolio with old buildings and renovated old buildings. And old buildings, you know, the challenge with old buildings is no matter how much you renovate them, there's still typically repairs and maintenance that come up on a fairly regular basis. And so they're a little more management intensive because you have two layers of communication. Layer number one is the tenant mentioning a repair that's needed. Layer number two, communicating with the contractor to repair the maintenance item. Even if you have a property manager, you're going to hear about, you know, it's like the property manager will say, the tenant said this needs to be fixed. What do you want us to do? Then they get you the quote. Then you have to approve the quote. Then you have to review the work that's been completed. Then you pay the invoice. So, you know, like there's a lot of management that goes into older buildings that's time consuming. And so there's a lot of older buildings in my portfolio, like hundreds of units worth of older buildings. And so to balance out my portfolio and to add assets that, while they may not cash flow as much, that are much easier to manage, I've started buying brand new buildings and or building brand new buildings that are designed for investors to be income producing.
So you're moving to the development side or buying new construction and
Both.
partnering with, so you're partnering with developers or you're doing an actual development by yourself? Like,
Or both.
okay.
Right now I'm building a sixplex on a corner lot in Edmonton, brand new sixplex. And we're using the CMHC program for affordable housing to build it. So it's very, very lucrative from a lending perspective. The last building I bought from a developer who, you know, I think they overextended themselves and got motivated. They bought one big lot, subdivided it into two lots, built two houses side by side. Each house had a secondary suite in the basement. So four total units now on this piece. And you know, it was typically in Edmonton over the Christmas period, the market really slows down and we see a lot of vendors get pretty motivated. So I had been watching these houses. They've been sitting on the market for about 3 or 4 months. The market started to cool down into winter and I just talked to the developer and said, hey, can we work a deal? I'll buy both houses, but you got to give me a really, really special price in order for me to do this. I'll close really quick. You'll have money in the bank for Christmas holidays, but I want to see a special price. Otherwise, I love it enough at a really good price. I don't love it at market value. So are you, if I take both of these off your hands and end your headache, you know, are you willing to sell these to me at a good deal? And they said, you know what? Yeah, we just want these off our books. We want to go into the new year fresh, you know, and so I got a really, really, really great deal on buying both of them side by side. So that's the kind of thing where I'm willing to be patient and choosy. And then if something really special comes along, I'll pick it up. Whereas earlier in my career, I was so focused on growth that I just wanted to find the next deal, wanted to find the next deal, wanted to find the next deal. Now, when the deal comes to me that matches my criteria, checks every box, I'll move on it. So I've slowed down quite a bit in terms of my pace of acquisition. But my portfolio is at a size that I'm really happy with. And so there's only room in my portfolio for amazing deals that are easy to come by, as opposed to
So,
Go ahead.
so right now, what is the price of the pre-construction? Like, I think right now the old price in Edmonton around 110, 120. Where is the actual pre-construction 250, 300? So what is the good price for you?
What type of a unit are you talking about? Because just to make sure we're on the same page.
Apartment buildings.
Oh, per door for apartment buildings.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that, just for reference, the houses I bought, the retail market value would have been about 565 per house, and I got them for 500 each.
So but it's still have a secondary suite already, so it's
Yeah,
two units.
that's a large 2,000 square foot house with 1,000 square foot secondary suite.
That's a big one, yeah.
So yeah, it's a big house, just right place, right time, right deal.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I got lucky and the developer needed to sell, so it worked out perfectly.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, those are nice when those happen. For apartment buildings, C grade older apartment buildings are going to be around 100 to 110. The B grade stuff that we're approaching is going to be 120 to 140. And then if you're approaching, like A grade older will be 160, 170, and then A grade brand new. A grade brand new will be in the low 200s. And then, I mean,
Yeah.
institutional, there's a few high rises that change hands, but those are like trading at a.
But the cap rate is going to be disaster. No cash flow.
Yeah, I mean, that's, the average person listening to this podcast isn't buying a $50 million apartment high rise, I don't think.
100%. 100%. So because you opened the subject of the B and C, what is the challenging neighborhoods in Edmonton, especially if you're focusing on adding value, even if you add value and the rent price is too much, you're not going to find someone is paying you this rent on a C area. So what is the challenging neighborhoods in Edmonton?
Yeah, the C areas in Edmonton, and maybe some listeners from Edmonton would debate me on some of these, but I think for the most part, I'll hit the nail on the head, would be the Alberta Avenue district, up 82nd Avenue and down 82nd Street, down 118th Avenue. I would describe Cromdale as a C area, as well as McDougall, Macaulay would be your C areas. I think some people, right on the cusp would be Stony Plain Road. Some people would describe the property near Stony Plain Road as C. Some people describe it as B. Now, as we move into neighborhoods like Queen Mary Park, that would be on the cusp between C and B, depending on who you ask. And then as we get into solid B areas, I would describe West Jasper Place as a B area. I would describe north side, north of the Yellowhead, that's mostly B areas. I would describe maybe parts of like the far east of King Edward Park would be a B area. And then the strong B areas, strong B would be like Inglewood, up 124th Street. Strong B would be maybe parts of the south side near Southgate Mall. And then A areas would be University area, Bonnie Doon area, Westmount Glenora area, those, and then downtown. Downtown is where you're going to see A as well. And then there's kind of a big gap in multifamily between the core of the city. And then as you get out to the very periphery of the city in the suburbs, you'll see a lot of institutional buyers buying A-class assets where, a developer would build a couple hundred unit wood frame 4-story building with the intention of selling off those condos individually. And then when the market turned, a lot of those institutional investors just started selling those buildings off, $20, $30 million for the entire building to, as A-class rental inventory.
Yeah. This information is really important because it's coming from experts like you. You're a realtor, you have a brokerage. So we really appreciate this information because you know better.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here just sharing this information about the city. And if anybody who's listening wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to chat. I love talking about real estate all day long.
Yeah,
So, it's
100%.
my pleasure to share.
Yeah, 100%. So the next question is, what is the business motivation to switch to the new build? Average price, financing, or return on investment? Because
Um,
eventually you're looking for
yeah,
scaling.
I would say from my perspective, it's actually return on time.
Hmm,
Um, if, for example, let's say, I'll give you an example of two properties. I have a 70-year-old house in,
hmm,
in near the university area. It's got an upstairs suite, it's got a downstairs suite, and I'd say probably at least once every 2 months, something's breaking down.
hmm.
The toilet's leaking, the tap is dripping, the light switch is broken, this is broken, that is broken. I constantly hear about it. And it's like, it's not dramatic, but it's just, there's always something. There's always something with an old house. Those two brand new houses side by side that I mentioned, we have four tenants, 1, 2, 3, 4. I haven't heard from any of them now in almost a year, and the rent just appears in the bank account every month. And because the houses are brand new, under warranty, nothing breaks, nothing goes wrong, nothing needs repair. The kind of people that like to pay a little bit extra for brand new houses are typically people that are extra financially responsible.
Hmm.
And, it just takes care of itself. And so that was kind of my motivation to switch to new inventory is
Hmm.
for the long term, I'm able to add investment to my portfolio that requires no additional time commitment in any way whatsoever, which is a priority for me at this point in my career.
But I think that the only challenge on this point is the adding value part, because you cannot do refinance. So in your plan, you're
That's
not
okay.
looking for any pulling money to pay your
If,
investors, because
if I
I
buy a five, if I, my perspective is if I buy a $500,000 house,
yeah,
I know you want to talk some multifamily too. So, let's add a zero. If I buy a $5 million building
yeah,
with, 15 suites in it,
yeah,
in 20 years, that $5 million building will be worth $10 million. I put $1 million down. And so I pay down $4 million of principal. I earn $5 million in appreciation. That's $9 million on a $1 million investment in 20 years with
yeah.
no fuss, no drama, no time commitment, no headache,
Oh,
no
okay.
real issues. That
This
works
is
for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So getting back to this, so when you're dealing with qualified investors, or you're dealing with regular investors, and in which kind of commitment? It's an actual GPLP, or the
Yeah.
regular
So
joint ventures?
when I raise capital for our commercial projects, we always set up a corporation,
Yeah.
unanimous shareholders agreement. So we don't do the GPLP structure.
Hmm.
I know a lot of colleagues and clients that have had a lot of success with that. I just, I set it up with a corporate structure. It seems to
Hmm.
work better for our projects, but um, there's a certain number of shares available. We divide up those shares based on each person's contribution to the project.
Hmm.
Once the money's in the corporation gets the financing, buys the building. The corporation owns the building. The partners own the corporation, and we're good to go.
Okay. Okay. And the commitment here, as you mentioned, 10 years or 5 years? So what is your approach usually?
We
Five
do
or 10
five,
years?
five, 5 year terms.
Oh,
And
okay.
there's a renewal / exit option every 5 years because the average mortgage term is 5 years, so it's just a nice round number.
Okay.
And then if there's an event at some point outside of that 5 year term, like the market has a big spike, or there's a partner needs to exit early and they're willing to, have a conversation about taking a little bit less because their exit is inconveniencing the rest of the partners. Like, the conversation's always open, but I've always done 5 years at a time for no other reason other than it just lines up with the average mortgage term.
Okay. So did you have this conversation a lot before, like someone is trying to get out with it before the 5 years?
We've had it happen a couple of times. In all my partnership agreements, we have an early exit clause
Hmm.
where if somebody wants to exit early outside of that 5 year term, then the remaining shareholders can purchase their shares for a 30% discount on market value.
Okay. Okay. Because of the
So
inconvenience.
because of the inconvenience, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if somebody has several $100,000 in the property, it's inconvenient to come up with several $100,000 on extremely short notice. So
Hmm.
it's got to be worth it's got to be worth the inconvenience and the effort for the people buying out the shares to have to do something that's outside of the plan.
Yeah.
And so, it's happened twice.
Hmm.
One time the investor ended up losing a little bit of money because the property had not gone up by 30% in value. yet. So I think they ended up losing like 5% on their money because we had about 25% growth at that time. But one time the person was more than happy because the property had gone up, a ton in value. And by the time they took their 30% discount, they were still up and they were, so it all worked out.
100%. So I will jump to a little bit another subject, which is if we can talk about your largest deal so far.
Sure.
What was the numbers, the NOI, how you get the deal, what was the upside about the actual deal, if you can break it down?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the biggest deal so far was a three building portfolio purchase.
Hmm.
So there were 3 buildings with 67 units in total. 2 of the buildings we liked, 1 of the buildings we did not like. And so, but I think that the vendor knew that 2 of the buildings were good and 1 of them was bad. And so their strategy for unloading their worst building was to couple their best 2 with it, which, smart. Okay,
Yeah.
we were willing to bite. The cap rate, the cap rate at acquisition, this was several years ago now. So we actually had about a 6.35,
That's really good.
6.25. Yeah, great cap rate.
Yeah.
One of the buildings was completely stabilized, needed no work, needed no renovations. Rents were at market, squeaky clean, happy with that building. One building that we liked was in a location that we liked. And remember, location is, my number 1 criteria, was in a location that we liked. And so it needed a bit of renovation, so we knew we could do something with it. And then the third building, the one we didn't like, was also, that needed quite a bit of renovation, but it was also in a location that we didn't love. But the rents were already below market, and there were comparables in the area showing higher than market rent. So from a BRRRR perspective, from a flip perspective, it was a prime target.
Yeah.
So we looped it all together, created a strategic plan where we were pretty sure that if we improved the building we wanted to keep and improved and then sold the building we didn't want to keep, we should be able to raise enough funds on a refinance to repatriate all the capital for the other 2 buildings. And it's like, okay, if we're willing to put in a year of really focused, dedicated effort, we might just be able to hold on to 2 buildings with very little, if not no money down. So, okay. So we went down that journey, did our massive renovations, repositioned a bunch of tenants, and ended up selling that 1 building. The funds from that 1 building and the refinance of building number 2, we didn't quite hit our goal of having no money in, but we went from about $1.5 million of equity in the property to about $250,000 of investor equity. So we were able to pay back about 1.25 and keep 250 in, which was, that was a big win because we ended up having, 2 sizable apartment buildings for $250,000 in, and then the rest of the equity for the loan to value. The rest of the equity for the loan to value just came from value that we added through the hard work that we did. So, that's a pretty good success story and happened to be our biggest deal.
So it was how much? 6 million or more? Is a portfolio?
The portfolio was about 7.5 million when we bought it.
Okay. And the NOI, do you remember, was like?
I can't remember the NOI.
Yeah, sure.
I remember the cap rate sticks out at about 6.25.
Yeah. Okay. Is this a VTP or did you had to put 25-30% down?
Well, we use mezzanine financing. So we put 1.5 down, and then we had a piece of about 2 million that was high interest, and then the rest was conventional. And then because the market was really hot at the time, the lenders were willing to lend on the after repair value. So, it was definitely a risky move because we borrowed, a couple $1 million at almost double-digit interest. But, it was a construction loan. We had a business plan in place. We were young and bold and willing to take the risk, and it worked out. So that's nice. But
I think if you don't mind, if you can explain the mezzanine financing option, because it's just a unique lending process.
Yeah.
So if you can highlight it.
Yeah, mezzanine in a building means it's like a second level. Like you walk up the stairs and there's a second level. So the reason the term mezzanine gets used for financing is it means multi-level financing. So this is just for all the listeners who it's a new term for. So what mezzanine financing means is you have multiple levels of financing. So I'll just create an example. We want to borrow $1 million, and the higher your loan to value, and the loan to value is how much money you borrow versus how much equity you put in. The higher the loan to value, the higher the lenders perceive the risk. And the higher the lenders perceive the risk, the higher the interest rate on that loan is going to be. So if you put 40% down and borrow 60%, you're going to have very low interest. If you borrow 95% and put 5% down, it's very high risk. Your interest rate goes up. Different lenders have different risk profiles. So that's where we get into this mezzanine, this multiple level financing. So you borrow 10 million. Lender number one is very low risk, very low interest rate. They're going to lend you 70%. Okay, lender number two, and let's say they lend you 70% at 3% interest. Lender number two says, we're a little more risky, we're a little more spicy, we're willing to go there. They'll lend you 10% at, say, 6% interest. Okay, so 70 plus 10, we're at 80. But we really want to push this thing. We really want to go hard. We want to put less money down. We find lender number three that says, you know what? We see what you're trying to do. We understand that you want to borrow some money to do this construction and renovation. We see that there's going to be an after repair value that gives us enough confidence in the deal that it's worth our time. We're going to lend you another 10% at, say, 11% interest. Okay, so we've got 70 at 3, up to 80 at 6, up to 90 at, what was the number I said? Was it 11? Let's say 11.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the remaining 10 to get us to 100% of the purchase price is actual cash equity from the purchaser. So that's a mezzanine debt. It's got multiple levels. And then you just do a little bit of proration math to figure out what the blended overall interest rate is over all of that money. Because you're not borrowing it all at 11. You're not borrowing it all at 3. You're not borrowing it all at 6. You're borrowing different pieces at different amounts, which creates a conglomerated interest rate. So that financing strategy is popular when, as an investor, you want to put less money down. And potentially if you have construction aspirations, because it doesn't make sense to borrow high interest debt in the long term. But in the short term, it can make sense to borrow high interest money that allows you to do a big scale project renovation, add value to the building, and then you refinance. The equity you get from the refinance allows you to pay back the expensive debt and create an overall loan to value that's palatable for a long-term piece of debt at a low interest rate. That's the general strategy.
Yeah, because the expenses of this loan is going to be high. I think the challenge always with mezzanine also is the size of the project itself. So you're not going to do this on $1 million project. We always look for 3 to 4 million project with, as you mentioned, 100% on an add value project when you can add value and do a refinance in 6 to 12 months and pull the money out. So
Yeah.
I agree. 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. Institutional lenders, it needs to be worth their while. Nobody wants to lend $100,000 for 4 months at 11% interest. They're not going to make any money. By the time they pay the lawyer fees and just go through all of the work of, approving the loan and lending you the money, it's like, that's a lot of work to do for a couple $1,000 of interest. So usually mezzanine financing only exists at the commercial scale because the dollars involved need to be large enough for this to actually be a worthwhile effort for the
100%.
lender involved. Yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah. For the people out there listening, because you're focusing, I think, on not on actual, not all of the real project on adding value, but or the appreciation. So I think the source of the money always is going to be raising capital. So for the people listening, want to raise capital, how you managed to create your system for raising capital, and what was the initial steps like really make a difference for you?
The thing I did when I got started is just talk to literally anybody who would listen about real estate.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't have any skill. So instead of assuming I would have a high closing ratio, I just decided I would do it on volume. And I probably had at least 50, maybe 60 conversations with potential joint venture partners before somebody was even remotely interested. So that's a lot. Think about sitting down with 60 different people to do a little conversation pitch or talk about real estate investing. I mean, for some people that might take a couple of years. I was super aggressive and that took me about 8 months. 2 to 3 people a week I would sit down with for coffee to talk real estate. And, the first conversations were awkward and I didn't really know what I was talking about. And I was, instead of having the mindset of trying to close, I just had the mindset of trying to learn. And I knew that every conversation would give me clues on what to say next time. And then, by the time somebody said yes, I was in the mindset that everybody was going to say no. And I was actually like taken aback when they said they were interested, because I was like, oh, if people have been saying no for so long, I forgot somebody might say yes eventually.
I had, to be honest, I had this 80% on 3 months. 10 of them sat with me, only 4 was interested.
Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So yeah,
4 for 80 is a pretty good ratio. You know,
yeah, it
that's
is not easy.
one in 20 is pretty darn good if you're new at it.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, your business model rely on GVs, not a GP. Can you tell me why you approach this kind of approach legal wise? Because did you have a problem with security laws because presenting the deals and all of this weird subject?
Yeah, so we do have a corporate structure.
Yeah.
It's just not a GPLP structure. It's more of a standard corporation where every shareholder is a director. We've, and everybody just has, and then the managing partners, which are, myself, have Class A shares, and then all the investor partners have Class B shares.
Yeah.
So, it's from a legal perspective, it's a very similar structure. From a tax perspective, the GPLP structure allows to have like flow through tax implications, but just based on my experience and based on the type of partners I've had, the corporate structure seems like it's worked well. And that's typically because from a distribution perspective, I deal with a lot of partners who are more in it for the long term. So it's actually more tax advantageous to leave more money in the corporation for the long term because we don't really pull distributions out. With a lot of my partnerships, we reinvest the cash flow into accelerated principal paydown, as opposed to doing cash flow distributions. And so that's just been my flavor of investing. At the very, very early days when I didn't think about growing into a larger entity, we did personal joint ventures, like a 15, 20 page joint venture document. James Knull, the person, is joint ventured with investor, the person. It's all kept on the personal level, personal lending, personal bank accounts. We run, from a tax perspective, I guess we'd be a sole proprietorship. It wasn't until we started doing commercial deals that required corporate borrowing entities that we set up our first corporation. But once, did it a couple of times, and once you get used to it, it's actually very similar to a joint venture agreement. Just on the corporate side, the legal document is called the unanimous shareholders agreement, but there's like an 80% overlap in the content of the legal paperwork.
I think there's a similar also approaches between, it's a bare trust, which is you have a corporation, but it's on your personal taxes anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm asking you, what is your superpower or strengths on the last 15 years on investing in real estate? What was actual strengths?
I would say one of my superpowers was just not giving up. I mean, at the beginning, especially, I had a very high capacity to just keep trying. So, you said you talked to 80 people. That sounds like we have a similar superpower. A lot of people will talk to 4 or 5 people, get 4 or 5 not interested, and then just pout and say, this doesn't work. I don't know why I'm trying, and stop trying. So, I think one of the most important superpowers for anybody starting out is just accept that you're going to have to try a lot before you make any progress. And it's going to feel like no progress, but learning feels like no progress because you see no results. And then all of a sudden you see results. So, it's an underrated superpower, but just the ability to keep trying as you fail, and learn. Easy to say in a podcast, very, very difficult to like have the emotional wherewithal to have another week of no success. Okay, I'm talking to 3 more people this next week, and just be okay with the process. Like that's a very important superpower for anybody that's listening, and probably one of the most important superpowers for any business venture, not just real estate. And then, I'd say my other superpower is I'm highly organized. Probably even more so than I need to be, but labeling files, having my emails all folded correctly, having, I had a cloud Dropbox folder years before the cloud ever really entered the conversation, so that my files were accessible anywhere, anytime. Everything is labeled by date. If you go into any of my property files, every file is labeled the same way. So it's, month.date.year-address- what the file is. And so, here I am 15 years later. If I need any piece of information at any point in my entire career, I can find it like that. which is, I mean, when you have one property on the go, having a messy desk covered with paper doesn't feel like a big deal. But if you plan to scale and grow, having checklists, systems, and easily accessible information, for me, it's been a critical aspect of being able to scale and grow smoothly.
I think as a lesson here is for any new investor or newbie is commitment and discipline. This is really
Yeah.
You have to have this. Always don't give up. Always focus on your goals, and it's gonna come anyway. So next question is, who was your influential mentor on your real estate career so far on the selling part? Because your biggest part is selling as a realtor and also on multifamily. So who was your mentor in your career so far?
Yeah. I would say one of my biggest role models was a guy named Don Campbell, who founded this organization called the Real Estate Investment Network. When I was young, he was speaking at events, writing books, having seminars. I thought he was a great personality, really smart, really charismatic, taught great content, learned a lot from him. So anybody listening, I'd recommend Don R. Campbell. Any book he's written about real estate is a really great book to read if you want to learn about real estate investing. Fantastic guy.
So you're focusing on readings on real estate or generally anything about marketing and sales. So what was like your latest book you read, grabbed your attention?
The book that I'm reading, the last two books I read were, I have it on the book's called Your Next 5 Moves by Patrick something Beth. Okay. And then I'll look at the audiobook because I listened to that one. And then in terms of like turning pages, physical reading, I'm reading Principles, Patrick Bet David, Your Next 5 Moves, Patrick Bet David. Fantastic. And then I listened to that on audiobook. And then I'm currently reading Principles by Ray Dalio, which unbelievable book. I would recommend that more so for anybody who's building an organization. It's not really, I think if I had read that book 10 years ago as a solo entrepreneur, it wouldn't have really landed as much as, now that I've got an organization of close to 50 employees. It's awesome. I mean, it's something I wish I had read when I had 5 employees, to be honest. So Principles by Ray Dalio, big thumbs up.
So what is your next move? Like, what is your, not next move, what is your 5 years plan, basically, what you're looking to do?
Yeah. So, I'm really focused on the real estate practice right now, which is the realtor business. Our Edmonton office is very well established. We're, if we're not the top team in the city, we're one of the top teams in the city, depending on which quarter you're measuring by. We've expanded into Vancouver. So we've got a Vancouver office. And then our next move is going to be to expand into Kelowna. One thing that we're in the process of getting into is project marketing. So like representing pre-sales on, 300, 400, 500 unit buildings. And then, from a portfolio growth perspective, again, it's just cherry picking the best of the best of the best deals that just show up and are too good to refuse. Whereas, when I was in the middle of my career, I wanted to grow a big portfolio. I wanted to do, 1 deal a month, 1 deal every 2 months. I wanted to raise capital like crazy. And so I was pushing to grow. Whereas now it's like a tree with a lot of rings in it, like 1 ring a year, 1 great acquisition, 1 property that's a good deal, and just slow progressive growth when the right deals come up. That's kind of how my portfolio is moving.
I think because you want to be sure about the return for your investors, because you have already track of record and you want to keep this record with a constant return. It's a really good approach. Yeah.
Totally.
So my final question will be how the people can follow your success.
I would say, I've been doing this for 15 years. So that's one thing that I think a lot of, especially younger people, young people want quick results and they want, big things to happen right away. And I was no different. When I was in my 20s, I was like, I want to own all the properties and be this mega success overnight and push. But, everything I've done has taken 15 years. And so there's no such thing as an overnight success, and nobody's paying attention when you're learning and failing. And so, you can spend 5 straight years where, you talked about talking to 80 people, 100 people, 120 people, Eventually, you're going to talk to enough people that it's going to work, but nobody will be paying attention to you when you're learning, failing, and posting no results.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's 2 years, 3 years, you buy your first property, you have 3 or 4 properties, and oh my gosh, how did you do all of this? And so don't ever forget the part of the story where people spend often years with no actual results. That is anybody starting, expect no tangible results for years, not weeks, not months, not a quarter, years. And appreciate that the result that you get from that first couple of years, maybe 3 years, is just learning how to do it and building your resolve so that, you know, when somebody's ready to say yes, you know what to do. That's super, super important.
100%, 100%. Thanks a lot for your time today, and we're really happy to have you today with us. And
It's
it
my
was
pleasure.
really
I'm
great,
really happy to chat.
Yeah, it was really good information about especially Edmonton, and we would be happy to bring you in again to the show.
I'd love to be a guest again sometime. Thanks again for having me, and for everybody that's listening. I love talking about real estate. Don't be shy about reaching out, and I hope to chat with some of you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.